So hello and welcome everybody. I'm Pierre. I am a staff member of World Habitat. I'm with my colleagues Mariana and Patricia from World Habitat in this session. And we are pleased to receive you here in a format that I will explain. For those who don't know World Habitat, we're a UK-based charity which works in the promotion of innovative solutions to ensure the access to adequate housing for all. And as you probably know, we organize in partnership with UN Habitat the World Habitat Awards, which is an international competition, and we select the winners every year, and then we work with them to disseminate what they do so that it can inspire other actors, stakeholders around the world. So today we are going to hear from experiences from 3 of our former winners from the awards around the subject of improving rural housing. So we have selected 3 different types of organizations from different countries, so we can discuss different approaches to the subject and hear from also your experiences who are here in the room, and so we can learn from each other working on rural housing. It's a topic that is quite often forgotten by housing policies, rural housing, or it is mainly seen as a question of bank loans or subsidies for housing repairs without taking into consideration the key aspects like the local knowledge, the local materials, the community that is living in the place that can benefit from the interventions in terms of empowerment and job creations. And often it's also decorrelated or not integrating the difficulties that are faced by rural areas, the exposition to climate disasters, the elderly people, vulnerable people who are not able to improve housing by themselves, and to also improve their livelihood. And so another important aspect related to rural housing is the connection with livelihood, agriculture, the protection of ecosystems, the resistance against forced displacements that occur when there is interest from tourism, agribusiness, mining, or the urban sprawl, because rural areas are located next to cities that are expanding, among other threats, and climate change I've also already mentioned. So altogether, we will now hear from 3 guests about their experience. After each presentation, you will be able to make a couple of questions, so we better understand the experience that are shared. And at the end, after the 3 presentation, we'll have time for everybody to make new questions, but also to share your own experiences, your thoughts, and questions about rural housing. So I was going to give the floor to Marcos, who just left us. Marcos is a national program coordinator of the Rural Habitability program from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning from Chile, the MINVU. It is known as MINVU, and it won the Silver Award this year for this national program, which is, so it's not one specific case study, but it's a national housing program that is publicly funded and that is available to rural communities in whole country of Chile.
So the first thing I would like to explain very briefly is that what we are presenting here is a state policy. It's applied, it's enforced by the Ministry of Housing and Urbanism. So there are no specific case studies. What we want to explain here is how this state policy works in this conception of a state that subsidizes, because the housing is a good that is transacted in the market. The families are supposed to buy the houses, to the real estate agents, except for those poorer families that cannot afford a house on their own. So the government subsidizes those families, gives them an amount of money as a subsidy for them to purchase these houses promoted by the government, but they are given a subsidy. It's a voucher, and they have to buy or build their own houses. And under that modality, between 2016 and 2023, we have delivered 45,000 subsidies. That's the framework under which this program is developed, this state policy. So what I'm explaining here is just a summary. So it's a state policy in a market scheme. The Ministry of Housing and Urbanism serves the poorer families by giving them subsidies so they can obtain their house. This is what we're going to explain. This program targets the families living in rural areas in general, or in places that have less than 5,000 inhabitants in urban areas. That's the scale of the program. The population in rural areas, according to the Ministry of Agriculture, is around 26% of the population. That is 1 out of 4 people live in rural areas. Our population is in around 20 million. So these are around 5 million people living in rural areas. Of 346 municipalities, 263 are rural. That is 76% of our territory is rural. And we're speaking of localities as small concentrations scattered all over the country. And there are around 35,000 localities like this. That is the area covered by this rural habitability program. In a country that has a very diverse geography, from the north, that is a desert, to Antarctica, and the area of the glaciers in the extreme south. So we have different weathers, geographic areas, islands. So the first aspect that we mention is the pertinence. Because of the climate conditions and the territorial conditions, it's not possible to have a single model for houses, to assign these houses all over the territory. So what we do is a social and technical diagnosis. This is the baseline diagnosis, the baseline tool for this program that considers the lifestyles, the local capabilities. There are no construction company that reaches all the country. So we have to work with the families in each territory. Logistics are very complex in the islands, for example. In Easter Island, that's also Rapa Nui, it's 10,000 kilometers from the coast of Chile. We are also there. We reach there by ship. And another thing we consider is the condition of each family, their isolation, their poverty, etc. So about that, about the pertinence or the relevance, we have different
tipos de intervenciones. Por ejemplo, en el norte suele utilizarse aún la solución de tierra cruda como revestimiento sobre estructuras de maderas naturales, la estructura de madera tradicional en zonas más centrales del país, estructuras de albañilería combinados con hormigón armado, con perfiles metálicos, perfiles de acero galvanizado,
panel systems, pre-made panel systems or industrialized systems. So the climate diversity, the territorial diversity is also accompanied by the diversity of technologies that are applied. And then the complexities of our country also involve the rural area. Natural threats, climate change. We always pay attention not building in risk areas because we're constantly struck by earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, volcanoes, and the wildfires that have been common all over the world. So this is a type of situation that we have to consider in the enforcement of our policy. And then we have a world of opportunities. Here I'm showing some technologies, the digital technologies, access to internet, technical irrigation. I mean, lots of technologies. So our solution is to industrialize houses with sustainable houses. Well, we have combined all these solutions so that our houses have a high quality and we can use all this knowledge and all this technology. So we always speak of applying the standard sustainability measures. On the other hand, we had different types of projects. First, the houses where the families have their own lot of land, we build a house there. They can organize themselves in groups of 60 families as well to build complexes of houses. We do that in several parts of the territory. And recently we incorporated the construction of community equipment that can be social equipment, cultural, productive equipment, even associated to the activities that the communities perform in their territories. And then the funding comes from the government. I'm mixing different concepts here. Marcos, if you can speak a little more slowly for the interpretation, please. Yes, thank you.
Sí, un poco más lento para la interpretación del inglés.
Okay, I was worried for the time. So the funding comes from the government. It's a subsidy, it's a grant that is given to the family. This is a conversion to the dollars based on our exchange rate. A single house is around $61,000, and a house in a complex is a little more expensive, around $75,000 per house. This is the subsidy that is given. And for the community equipment, the subsidy is of around $300,000. In the picture you see in the bottom left, for example, that is community equipment. And then another factor is applied that has to do with the isolation. We apply an isolation factor. It's from 1.1 to 2.0. That means that the subsidy can be even doubled based on different conditions, distance, the difficulties in access. And there's also an additional subsidy for transport, because in some areas, as in Easter Island, it takes around 10 days to get there by ship. So sending the materials, the containers, requires a high cost. The management of the subsidies, how are the subsidies granted in this program? The first thing is that there's a budget law. It's an annual law issued by the government. It's passed by Parliament. And that budget law assigns an annual budget to the Ministry of Housing. And as part of that budget, there is a budget line to rural habitability. So as a program, we have an annual budget that is approved by National Congress at the end of each year for the next fiscal year. The assignment of the subsidies is done through an open competition that that follows some rules. And these rules are published nationally. This year we have 4, one for new houses that can be individual or collective, another one for the improvement or expansion of the houses, also for the construction of indigenous housing that we are organizing for the second time. It's exclusive for the 11 indigenous peoples that are recognized in our country, and then another competition for community equipment. They are public and they are called through a platform at the ministry. And finally, the results are published nationally and regionally at the official bulletin and in the major newspapers. So it's a transparent management. The lists of the beneficiaries are publicized through these media. And then about the applicants, the main focus are those families that are in the 40% poorest sector of the population. They appear in a social registry of households. that indicates poverty not only in terms of income, but also other factors that affect the structural poverty. Also the housing conditions. There you see an example in the picture. We attack these conditions, as you see in the picture, and we try to turn this into the houses that we showed you before with more technological development. The size of the family is also a factor, the availability of the land. These are different conditions that appear in the rules in order to grant the subsidies. What about the actors? In the public sector, we have the Ministry of Housing and Urbanism, the Ministry of Agriculture, because we have to operate in farming lands. So it's necessary to have a permit to use those lands for houses. Also, the Ministry of Health, that approves the sanitation systems, both collective and individual, whether they are part of the public networks or they have to be solved individually on each lot. And also the Ministry of Public Works that manages the rural drinking water and also mediates with the concession holders. So these four ministries at least are related to our program. As to the private sector, well, the management is outsourced, both for the projects and for the construction of the works. So here we have an actor that is called the rural management entity, and those are the consultants, the professionals that develop the projects, they do the architecture, the engineering, sanitation, electricity, etc. And the audit of the work is also outsourced to an external professional company. So these three roles are outsourced. And finally, the private sector is also involved in terms of the utilities. We have the companies for the drinking water, electricity, and for internet. As to the difficulties, the first difficulty is coordination and planning, because each of these entities have their own interests, their own goals, and we also have multiple reviews and permits, both public and private. In the private sector, they are focused on profit. So the interests of the construction company, of the rural management entity is focused on obtaining profit, not just the social aspect. And we also have a unified territorial information system. We work on data that are quite scattered sometimes, and that makes it more difficult for us to do the planning. As to the critical aspects, I mean, we are part of the government. So this is from our perspective. These are the critical obstacles. One is the difficult access to drinking water. Second, the low level of professionalization of the private stakeholders, because as this is based on open competitions, a company can apply for a competition and not win it. So that means that according to the volume of the projects they achieve in a competition, they may expand or reduce their staffing levels, for instance. Another aspect is the high dependence on the financial system, and I'm going to explain this in a little more detail. In terms of the operational aspects, as a result of the pandemic and all the subsidies that were given after the pandemic, we had a reduction in labor. Many families did not go back to work after 2020. Also, the lack of coordination among the different public actors, it's very difficult for us to obtain all the permits, etc. And the low number of professionals in the public services that participate in the program. In the economic and financial aspects, this is very important. A critical obstacle is the impact of inflation on the cost of construction, because as everything depends on private actors, the government is not involved in any of these components. So the cost of the materials, the cost of transport, the cost of oil, the cost of food, etc., all that has an impact on the value of the square meter for the construction. So all the elements associated to inflation will eventually have an impact. So every year we have to increase the amounts of the subsidies following the level of inflation. Production today depends basically on the economic capability of the companies, the working capital that each company has to build the houses. And there's a concentration of the producers and distributors of construction materials. So that's another market aspect. And prices are determined not so much by inflation, but because of the high concentration. And finally, the biggest weaknesses are associated to the financial system. I mean, the high interest rates prevent the companies from having loans for their construction. That low access to credit is also an important factor. We can provide loans, but we have to ask for a guarantee. And so we go back to the issue of the interest rates. And the level of indebtedness with the companies prevents them from building more houses. So in this program, we have a production capability that is quite limited, basically by the economic capability of the companies and the financial system and the interest rates that are very high today in our country because of the economic crisis and because of our dependence on copper, that is our main product in our economy. So as a public policy, as a state policy, we have all these possibilities, all these mechanisms and tools. We have a very complex management, but a high dependence on the financial system. And as a result, we have important restrictions. So that, Pierre and dear colleagues, that's all. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Marcos. I'm going to switch. I'm going to continue in Spanish, actually. So you showed us how the project works, how the funding is managed. Could you give us a little more detail as to how you select the beneficiaries of this state policy locally? Because the team of your ministry is quite reduced. It's located in Santiago, and you have contact with other services of the government that are decentralized and work in the community. So how do you identify the demand, and how do you decide the technical aspects with the beneficiaries in the field for their validation and funding? Well, three factors. Thank you for the question. First, the ministry is decentralized through regional services. They are called regional housing and urbanization services. It's like the operative arm of the ministry programs. The families apply through an IT platform in a centralized manner. When these calls are made. And the rural management entities are private consultants, and they develop the calls. They contact the families, they take the information from the families, they develop the project, and they present it. They apply for it. So the private companies apply on behalf of the families. And these decentralized services, the housing and urbanism service of the region, evaluates the projects. So the procedure is, through the platform, they apply, and there's a series of requirements that are already established. The families that meet the requirements enter their projects physically or digitally with all the information, and the regional service reviews it, approves the projects, and with that approval from the regional housing service, then the ministry, that is us, centrally, we award the subsidies. That is the mechanism. So the private sector is involved because they get in touch with the families, they develop the project. projects, they submit them through the digital platform. This regional service reviews, evaluates, approves the project, and then centrally at the ministry, we award the subsidies. Once they are awarded, they are published in the official bulletin and in regional newspapers, all the lists of the people that were selected for the subsidy. That is the procedure. Okay, thank you.
Gracias.
And then as to the difficulty of access to the construction materials, the transport times, transport costs, do you also work with local materials that can be found closer to the areas where you are working? Perhaps can you tell us how you work with materials and techniques that are local? And also if there's a self-construction component, individual or collective, to reduce the costs of the works and benefit the families directly. Well, as to the first aspect, given the different characteristics of our territory, in the north, the center, and the south, the correct materials are different in each region because of climate reasons, etc. So the materials are different, but the concentration of the production and sale of construction materials is in the hands of large sellers. They have their own chains of construction materials. That is, the large companies buy directly, but I mean, the cement industry, the timber industry, the steel industry for construction, it's all concentrated. So those are the suppliers. There are regions where there's timber or where the cement blocks or the bricks are locally produced, and it's easier to have access to them in the territory. But it's not that the families can go to that and do the construction on their own. No, everything is related to a market for the purchase and sale of construction materials. And the other thing is, we have the self-construction modality. It's rather self-management, we call it, because the program does not contemplate the families building their own home, but rather that they manage the construction with local workers in their community. There's always people working in the construction sector, the group of construction workers in the different regions. So that's a modality that is also contemplated. We call it assisted self-construction. That is, the families or the local workers build the house, a subsidy, a separate subsidy is given, an additional subsidy is given for the purchase of materials that are bought from these suppliers, that can be regional or local, and then an additional subsidy to pay for the professional assistance. That is, all these projects contemplate the local labor, also the local purchase of the materials, and also architects, engineers that give their professional advice. So that the same subsidy that the family obtains through this competition is divided into three components. One is to pay the workers, another one to pay for the materials, and the other to pay the technical assistance in the management of the work. It's always possible for the families to work on their own, but those are very limited cases. It's not part of the sample that we present. That is, in most of the cases, the local management is more common than the family management in our case.
Our next speaker is Sonam Penh. She is Executive Director of Tarayana Foundation from Bhutan, which works nationally in the Kingdom of Bhutan. Sonam, the floor is yours to introduce the work that you do with communities. Thank you. And just remember that Tarayana Foundation was a silver winner 3 years ago already of the World Habitat Awards. So you're on mute, Sonam. And we can see
sorry.
your screen well.
Sorry. Good morning, good evening. It's around 7:40 p.m. in Bhutan. I'm happy to take part in this experience sharing event. So as Perry mentioned, we were recipient of silver 3 years ago. So the organization is, we work in very remote rural areas. I'm sorry, I can't seem to move the slide. Okay, so we just turned 21 this year, and we were founded by the Queen Mother, who toured the country on foot and who saw that there were many isolated communities in rural areas that needed support from an organization like ours. This is our vision, mission, core values, and motto. And we have around 52 CSOs in Bhutan, and we are one of the largest one with the widest outreach, especially in the rural areas. We focus on poverty reduction. And this is a map of our country, and we work throughout the country. So the picture you see is my field colleagues who live and work in the rural communities. So this is a community development model that we have developed. This came up as we worked with different communities and assessing their needs. So as you see, housing is the core of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do. So everything else revolves around housing. So it's a very, it's a holistic approach through which we try and lift communities out of poverty. We have 3 major programs: social development, economic, and environment and climate. So the housing comes under the social development program. So I'll share about the process, how we do the housing improvement here in the country. And for us as a grassroots organization, community mobilization process, it's the most important aspect of what we do. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our field colleagues who live and work in the communities. So they do all these consultations. So how we start engaging with the communities is before we go down to the communities, we inform. So you saw 20 different districts in the country. So in the districts, we have the governors. So we would reach out to the governor and inform the governor about our interventions in the particular site. Then we do community consultations. So in the community, we do needs assessment, we do focus group discussions, we do resource mapping, and normally the communities would have a wish list of how they want us to serve them. So we sit down with them and prioritize their needs, and only the issues they cannot resolve on their own, we try and develop programs out of it and look for funding to do the interventions. So we also make sure that what we are planning to do is not in the government's plan already. And we prepare the work plan in consultation with the communities so that it doesn't conflict with the agricultural activities. So these are some pictures of how we do the consultations with the communities, doing resource mapping, focus group discussions. So coming to the housing, so we do the needs assessment first. As I mentioned, we inform the governor, the local government, and then we identify the housing needs in the community. So we also do this wealth ranking where the community members would sort of tell us who's the poorest of the poor in the community and who's the better off. So that also helps us in identifying the beneficiaries of our housing program. But then we also form a committee at the local level where we engage the different local leaders, and we have our field officers. So he or she is also part of this committee. And this committee would do physical assessment of the beneficiaries to make sure that they are genuinely in need of our program. Then we get all the information. So these are some of the existing houses, the old houses. So it's mostly made of bamboo, thatch roof bamboo, and they would have just 1 or 2 rooms in the entire house. So there's a tedious process actually involved in the construction because of these processes. If the communities are to do it on their own, they would take like at least a year just to complete the process. So through our program, our field officer would facilitate, would lead all these the paperwork, the processes that are involved. So in Bhutan, unlike in most other countries, we have most of our farmers would own the land. So they would own land, but maybe the sizes would differ from one family to another, depending on the status of the family. So when you construct a house, you just cannot start a construction right away. You have to get clearance from the government. So this, you have to submit a request, and then the government officials would visit your site and then do all the demarcation. Only after that you can actually start the construction. Then the housing, the drawing has to be approved by the government, by the local authorities. And then if there's an electric pole, you need to seek clearance from the power corporation. Likewise, these are cases case by case. If there's a community member without land, then we won't help him or her construct the house on the government land, but rather we would refer them to His Majesty's office. So in Bhutan, only the king has the authority to grant land to landless. So we would refer the case and then also facilitate in getting a land for that particular family. So these are pictures of the land officers visiting the site. So I'm talking about very, very remote areas in Bhutan where when Tarayana started working, we didn't have road access. So there were cases where there were villages where we had to trek for 3 days just to reach the site, another 3 days to return. So that's how far we work. Basically, we serve the last mile. So land is one thing, and then we also need to avail timber permit. That's another important aspect of this construction process. So we have to, so there's this window to avail timber permit in a year. So we have to make sure that we are applying for the permits in those months. So after that, again, these forest officers would come to the community, go to the forest, mark the timber. Then there's a month where they can actually start working on the timber. So, yeah.
Sonam, we lost you.
I'm so sorry, I'm at home and I have on my kids.
Okay.
But I'm sorry. So then these are again case by case. There are communities which are in the national protected area where the process are even lengthier than in the other areas.
You're on mute, Sonam. We cannot hear you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So then we mobilize the communities into group. In each village, we mobilize them into groups. So the number of group members would depend on the size of the village. So for instance, if the village has 20 households, we would make 2 groups, put 10 households into each group. And then they draw lottery to see who's going to get the first turn. Otherwise, there's always these very vocal people in the community who'd want to get theirs done first. So to ensure that this is a fair process, we make them draw lots. And then what they do is the 9 members would come and help the first one to build his or her house, where everybody contributes labor, but the owner will not pay them, because he or she will in turn help them when it's their turn to build the houses. So that's the group formation and how the construction happens in groups. So in this process, what happens is it actually enhances and strengthens the community cohesion and the community vitality, because they have to depend on each other to build the houses. So even if there were issues, some issues with each other in the past, because of this process, they have to get along. They have no choice, but they have to be, they have to get along. So this used to be a traditional practice in Bhutan, where all the members, it's like the voluntary labor contribution. So we have revived this through our housing program. And then we supply the materials. When the groups are formed, we supply the materials, and then starts the construction. I'm sorry, the slide is not moving. Yeah, so then my field colleagues would do the supervision, they would do the monitoring, because they live in the community, they're monitoring the house construction on a daily basis, and then they would report to the head office. So this is a picture where the committee does physical verification. This is where we supply the materials, and as I said, formation of group, and then drawing lots to determine who's going to the turns. So here you see all the women getting their hands into construction, which is predominantly a male business, but because they get this opportunity to acquire new skills, they were showing a lot of interest. And this is another. So this is a toilet. So apart from together with the housing, we also do toilet construction, water, sanitation, everything. So these are pictures from different parts of the country. This is from the east, where houses are built mostly of stones. So we use locally available raw materials. That's why our housing programs have very low carbon footprint. The only thing we bring from outside is the CGI roofing, which we cannot produce, so we have to buy that. But others, more or less everything is sourced locally. So this is just to show the different designs, the different styles of housing across the country. So in some parts it's two-storied, in some it's one. Some are built with rammed earth, some are built with stones. So it depends on where the community is. So far we've done over 2,500 houses throughout the country. And we have prepared this FAQ because we're constantly looking for resources to build houses. So one question we often get asked is, how do we select the beneficiaries of our housing? So the country does these poverty assessment. So we have different assessment reports. We base our beneficiary selection on that. But at the same time, the founding president of the foundation has traveled throughout the country on foot. So there's hands-on experience of the president. So we also select our beneficiaries based on that. Then we have communities approaching the foundation directly. Sometimes it's the local leader, sometimes it's the district governor who approach the office directly. And then these are just the processes. Yeah, so this is also a process how we select the beneficiaries in the village by forming a committee and doing the door-to-door survey. And then finally, that list is submitted to the foundation. Again, we make sure that all the processes and clearance are sought before actually starting the construction. So as I mentioned, those who don't own the land, we refer them to the King's office. And there's also a question that we get asked often, will the family own the house? Yes, they do own the house because they own the land. Yeah, so we make sure that we are not constructing on a government or a disputed land. That's why we need the land record officer to come on the site and do all the assessment before we begin the construction. So when it comes to the design, it's the community decides what kind of design they want. But in most cases, the traditional designs are made based on the topography, the climatic conditions. So we try and stick to that because it's meant for that kind of the environment and the location. Yeah, so the local government will approve the drawing where there's a requirement of some minimum features that the houses has to maintain, especially having the traditional designs on the window and door. So there's some requirement that is like mandatory. And as I mentioned, we use locally available raw materials and it's low carbon footprint. So in the east, as I said, houses are mostly built with stones and timber. They're two-storied. In the south, is mostly one-storied. So these are some pictures of houses in the east where it's made of two-storied. As you can see, we use a lot of timber for flooring as well as window, for roofing. And these are all the group constructions that are happening. This is in the west where we do rammed earth buildings. This is in the east where we have plenty of stones there. So we used stones. These also in the east. And through the process, we worked in communities where the communities were hunter-gatherers, which means they never settled on a land properly, permanently. So they didn't have housing skills. So what we did was we partnered with the vocational institute in the country where we did an exchange. The trainees of that institute, we took them to the community and they trained the communities on how to use the modern techniques. And they also at the same time learned from the communities the traditional techniques. So in the process, our community members got trained on carpentry and masonry, which later, when they became carpenters, we hired them to build houses in other parts of the country. So the communities had their houses at the end of the project, but they also acquired this new skill through which they could earn some income. So just to share a little bit about the costing, sorry, my the 3 zeros missing, but approximate cost is around 7,000 USD. But if the actual cost is around 25,000 USD, and this 7,000 is spent on materials, on skilled labor. So the house normally the house takes at least 2 to 3 months. So we pay for 2 months skilled labor, and there's a small cost on transportation, on fuel, and facilitation. So just to share the benefits from this program, firstly, it's obviously security for the family, because when they live in those thatched roof, small huts, they're always worried about their houses, the rain seeping in, it being destroyed by natural calamities. So that's the first thing. Then we also realize that it gives a lot of self-confidence, boost the self-confidence of the family members when they become owners of these houses. We see a lot of difference we see a lot of transformation on an individual basis. They can maintain hygiene and sanitation. As I mentioned earlier, because they're working in groups, the community vitality and cohesion is enhanced. Then, as I said, they acquire new skills, which enables them to earn additional income. And they can also use this property to mortgage for accessing credit. So this is one of the houses in Western Bhutan. So I'll end here. I'll be happy to answer questions. I think I've not included everything around housing, but this is all about what and how we do. But the previous speaker talked about housing policy and the government programs. In Bhutan, our housing policies are more for people in the service and people who are in the low income bracket in the urban areas. But in the rural areas, we don't have any government housing schemes or policies. So Tarayana Foundation is synonymous with the housing program. So it's us in the country who's really trying to ensure that everybody has a roof over their head, especially in the rural areas. So I'll stop here, and I'm sorry for all the distractions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem, Sonam. It's really amazing quality and very dignifying homes that you show here. It's really, really precious work that you achieved to do with the communities. So yeah, congratulations for this great work and for the good presentation. It's really clear. I will invite you to write your questions in the chat if you have, or to keep them for after we hear from José. So we keep on time and we make sure that he has time to present, and that we can have questions after. So José Afonso is from Just a Change, which is a Portuguese non-profit organization which works with volunteers to improve homes in rural areas, and they were bronze winners in 2020 for a project called Camp In that José is going to talk about. So José, you are able normally to share your screen. We are listening to you. Thank you.
I think you are already seeing my screen. Can you confirm?
Yes, it is loading. And yeah, it should be full screen. Yes, we can see it. Thank you. The floor is yours, José.
Okay, so I'm José, and I'm from Just a Change. We are a non-profit that renovates the homes of people in housing poverty. We started in 2010 when two friends decided to go to downtown Lisbon to sing and to dance in order to collect some changes. And they decided to use the money. In the first moment, they were a bit decided if they were using it to give to homeless people, to give food for the most vulnerable, but they were invited by a local parish to paint a home of a very young couple. And when they entered that home, they discovered a whole new reality that was not, they were not aware. The movement of Just a Change started with this small house, but we discovered that more than 400,000 people in Portugal live in housing poverty. This affects people from both rural and urban areas. The focus of our presentation today will be on rural areas, but I would say that these are the most common aspects that we see on the field. So when we talk about structural problems, we are talking about leaking roofs, structures that are falling apart, lack of infrastructure, for example, not having access to a toilet or piped water. And these are aspects that are fundamental for people to have dignified life. So this is one example in the north of Portugal, in Vila Pouca de Aguiar, and here you can see this beneficiary did not have any doors or windows, for example. This one is in Óbidos, in the center of Portugal. And in here you can see the typical home that we find. So we usually have three main profiles of beneficiaries: elderly people, adults, and also families. And this home was from an adult living by his own without support network. So just to go a bit in depth, these are some numbers that we also have from Portugal. But the one that surprised me the most is that Portugal is the second country in the European Union that has the highest increase in mortality rates during the winter. And our winter is not comparable in terms of temperatures with the north of Europe or Central Europe. So this means that our homes are not prepared for the winter and for the cold temperatures. And the ones that suffer the most with that are the most vulnerable. But these 4 words are our mission: renovating homes, rebuilding lives, because we believe that by renovating the home, we are promoting active change in that particular beneficiary. We believe that our home is the most important place in the world. So if we don't have the most basic aspect guaranteed, it's not possible to go further and develop a more fulfilled life. So we mobilize volunteers, we mobilize local communities in order to promote this transformation in not only the house, but most importantly in the beneficiary that lives there. So this is another home that we renovated in Óbidos. This is the home of Mr. Gabriel, that is also from Óbidos, and he, of course, we did not solve all of the issues that Mr. Gabriel still has, for example, in terms of health issues or other economic deprivation that he still has, but at least the dignified and basic aspect of having a home is solved. So this is one of the before and afters that we have. So the houses that I showed you in the beginning are from Mr. Domingos, and this is the before and after, and not only having more the structure of the roof, windows, doors, but also accessibility. This is a key aspect for us. And in here, Mr. Isidro in Óbidos, that now has a dignified place to live. So I usually say that more than the before and after of the house, we also have we not always have the chance to show the before and after of a beneficiary. And here, this picture shows a lot. So Mr. Victor was working with us, and as we invite and incentivize all beneficiaries to do, but there was a turning point when he said to us, I'm having a new home, I'm having a new place to live, I want to change my haircut. And he asked our volunteers to give him a haircut and to trim his beard. And this is one of our success stories in terms of how a specific aspect as the change promoted by the construction and the renovation can give a huge and fundamental aspect in terms of self-esteem. So how do we do this? So we work in a 4-step methodology. So we map and identify together with local actors the homes. So we work together really closely with municipalities, which are a key partner to us. So they have their social services, but also municipalities and local parishes, local NGOs that know where our potential beneficiaries live. And then we mobilize resources. In here, it's crucial that it's crucial that municipalities also join the project in terms of financial support. So they finance the materials, finance the technicians, because if you think about it, of course, we mobilize volunteers, we have teams of volunteers, maybe 8 to 10 volunteers in one home, but it's also important to have a technician in each home. So depending in terms of the complexity of the home, sometimes we have 1 or 2 technicians. And in here, the municipality, but also local companies, local foundations fund directly the projects, and the projects are decentralized. Then we do the renovation, and in here we have three main programs. I will do it. I will show them afterwards. And then we started our follow-up process, because we believe that the construction aspect is just the beginning. So we mobilize the volunteers to keep their relationship with the beneficiaries active, and also the local community as a whole to embrace the specific areas of each beneficiary. So if some beneficiaries need some specific help, we give and allocate that beneficiary to a local NGO that can give decentralized support. So our intervention programs are the turn-up, camping, and all-in. So the turn-up and camping are focused on private dwellings. So they are focused on people that live in those homes. Sometimes they are owners, but sometimes they are tenants. And we work with tenants with the agreement of the landlord. But these cases are the majority, and they are most focused on Lisbon and in Lisbon and in Porto, the huge metropolitan areas in Portugal. But the camping is the big star. The camping, in terms of scale, scalability, and in terms of the idea of replication, the program is much easier, because we can do a campaign in the north, in the south, in the center, because it's really easy to implement and to do it very decentralized. The all-in is our business model. So companies join us with social team buildings. We gather that team building events in an institution. This helps us to go to the second home for many beneficiaries, sometimes nursing homes, sometimes kindergartens, but the companies give us a donation, and we manage that donation in order to make a margin, a small margin, to fund our renovations, so that our beneficiaries can have this renovation without paying. So in my closing remarks, so this is our impact. We've been from north to south, more than 400 homes, but more than these numbers, I think that Mrs. Adelaide give her testimony by using our shirts every day, and we visit her in the last summer, and she was still having this huge joy for the team of volunteers that was in her house. So just to finish, I decided to bring the story of Mrs. Natividad, the home where I was lucky to participate, because I work in our home offices, but we have the chance every year to go to the fields and work together with the teams of volunteers. And we were in Almeida, so this was the south of Portugal, very rural areas with extreme heat. So in here you can see that Mrs. Natividad was always giving us her company every day, and we were always drinking water every time we could. But Mr. Natividad was an 86-year-old lady living alone with her grandson. And in here, the main aspect of this story is that we believe that changing this particular home, this particular story was relevant, even though if the beneficiary is just one or two, in this case, beneficiaries, and our funders and our foundations and companies that work together with us are really aligned with this, working to find a systemic answer to housing poverty. So this is the last picture, because we visit Mr. Natividad in December. So we were able to visit her, and she was super happy, and with a more not only energy efficiency, but also with more dignified home. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, José. Thank you very much for this nice presentation and for keeping to the timing also. Just for clarification, so most of the funding comes from private donors that give to Just a Change for a particular project or for your whole set of activities. And you were mentioning the in-kind contribution from municipalities with materials and technicians, case by case. So just to see that about your fundraising model, and also if you have expanded to other countries, just if there have been replications of your model in other countries.
Yes. At this moment, I'm going to answer the last question. So at this moment, we strategically decided to focus on Portugal and not replicate to other countries, because the evaluation that we did was more impactful for us to invest every euro in terms of impact return to do it in Portugal, because although we already have been working on more than 30 municipalities, this is 1/10 of the total landscape of the country. So there is much there are many municipalities and many territories that we didn't have the chance to go. For example, we have two archipelagos in Madeira and Azores, that with areas that we did not have the chance to do a program at the moment. In terms of fundraising, so this is important because the project of camping is funded locally, so the municipality contributes the majority of the financial aspects. In some cases, they also give materials and in-kind aspects to reduce the costs of the homes. But the participation of municipalities is mostly financial. But more and more, we are witnessing a good tendency of companies to join us with social impact investment. So companies such as EDP or companies such as Leroy Merlin and IKEA that are able to give us not only funding to our indirect costs and structure, this help us to develop and create new ideas, create new projects, but also to have more impact. So if the municipality provides and gives leverage to renovate 3 homes with these private partners, we sometimes can have in the same project a 4th home. So this has been the process of growing, because last year we renovated 85 homes, and only in these 3 months of summer we are doing 86. So we are doing in 3 months more than we did in the entire year of last year.
Right, thank you. So we've heard of 3 very different approaches in very different countries, of course. Maybe you have questions for each other, Marcos, José, Sonam, something you would like to ask the 2 others. Feel free to, and everyone here in the room also feel free to raise your hand and ask questions to our speakers, or to use the chat if you prefer. Yes, Marcos.
Yes, I would like to ask Sonam and José, how far are your possibilities as a country to have policies. Our policy is not good. I mean, that's not the point, not copying our policy. But how far are you from having a state policy? As I told you, we have already assigned 45,000 subsidies. We grant 2,500 per year, and we build around 1,700 houses per year in this process, and we hope to grow. And that is because there's a state policy. So if you don't have that policy, do you think that in the future you can have a state policy for this purpose, for rural housing? Thank you.
I think I don't know if I can answer first, but at this point we have been struggling in Portugal with a housing crisis, and this affects the whole country. But there is more pressure around the metropolitan areas in Lisbon and Porto. So in terms of public opinion, I would say that for the government, the priority will be for controlling demand and expanding offer to reduce the prices of homes. We had quite recently a change in government that is trying to solve the housing crisis, but I think that the housing crisis is quite widespread in whole Europe. So this has to do with interest rates, and also you mentioned, and I was quite interested to talk to you about inflation, because that is an aspect that also affects us directly in terms of, for example, technicians. But specifically for rural areas, I think that we are far away from doing that. We have local policies that are really good and really successfully, but we are finding hard for local municipalities to talk with their local neighbors. So we are developing an advocacy department in Just a Change in order to push for local policy, because we believe that by creating small local good examples, they would work as a firehouse. So they can lead other municipalities to promote rural interventions in private homes. But at this moment, I think we are still far away from doing that.
Thank you. Sonam, I think you already answered somehow about the policy, but
yes. So we do have housing policy, but as I mentioned, it's focused more on urban areas for low income. So the government is in the process of working towards home ownership for the low income. So as I said, the focus is all in the urban areas, but in the rural areas, for the rural communities, we are planning to come up with the policy brief. If there's any organization that initiates, it has to be us, because we are the only ones working on rural housing, and we have the data and information. So we plan to put up a policy brief, which we hope would result into some policy. Yeah, otherwise, policy on its own, it's there. It's just that there's not much mention about rural housing. Yeah.
Yeah. Sonam, your funding scheme is also through international donors, right? Most of the funding comes from international cooperation. Do you also get money from the national government partly to go fund?
Yeah, so we are also largely a donor-dependent organization, not just for housing, for everything. We depend on our development partners. But we find it very difficult to mobilize resources for housing from the development partners, actually. So we've been very fortunate to have an individual donor, a venture capitalist from the US. So he was very fortunate to give us $1 million to to improve and work on 500 plus houses. So he's been the most generous donor in terms of housing. But in the past, we also worked with UNV and UNDP. So normally the UN, they don't support infrastructure, but what we did was we packaged it as a skills development because they support skills development. So we designed the housing program in such a way that it's about training the community members on carpentry and masonry, but the end product is the house. So we managed to find a way. And later the UN deputy head, when he went to the community and he saw the vast difference we've made through a small project, he helped us mobilize more resources. So that was when UNDP had a poverty program, but unfortunately they no longer have this program, this division. So we've not been able to work with any development partners in the recent times. We also had a small CSR from one of our banks here. They've also been generous. So they supported one entire village with their CSR component. And other than that, we depend on individual private donors and Helvetas Swiss International. Helvetas Bhutan has also helped us and build many homes across the country. So yes, these are our major partners. And we also have this YPO, the Young Presidents Organization. So they do this trip throughout the country, I think. So we had one of the YPO chapters adopt a village where we could do housing. But in the last 3 years, we've not been able to do housing. We have over 2,000 requests, but because of lack of resources, we've not been able to do any.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, and I know there's also other great organizations here in the room that have been finalists of the awards, Programa Vaca, Fundasal, Pamoja Trust, Planète Enfant et Développement. I see people here that I know work in these organizations. If you have questions or if you also want to comment from your perspectives or from your countries, feel free to raise your hand and to ask questions. And we have a question in the chat for José about the training of the volunteers who decide to work with you. How does this happen? And also, once they have done one camp, do they usually come back and do another one the next summer, or is it like a group of people who get addicted by trying to help their communities? And
Yes.
yeah, how do you manage this community of volunteers?
Basically, we work in our community as a process of keeping the community always together with us. So we incentivize volunteers to participate in one program, and we usually, when they gain more experience with more programs, we invite them to go to the next level, which is become a coordinator. So they are like the captain of that specific team, and they make the bridge between the technician and the volunteers. So the coordinator is a key figure in our teams. And also, after some experiences and some time, some coordinators are invited to become project managers. So our project managers are mostly coming from our community of volunteers. So it's quite good because the project managers of today are the inspiration of the project managers of the future. So this is a way of keeping our community together. We give training in the beginning of each program in two areas, in safety and in our project management flow. So they know exactly to whom to talk and which is the the person that can solve each problem. But when we are working in construction, we have our teams split between people and volunteers that are completely fresh, completely new, that didn't touch a brush or something or cement never in their life. But we also have volunteers that are more experienced. So we combined experience with no experience. In this way, we promote a cohesive team, balanced in gender, balanced in experience, that can have a good experience. Of course, the learning curve is quite short, so the campaign promotes that efficiency. So when we are in the campaign, every day is the continuation of the day before. So it's easy to know what the next task is, and the tasks are very well outputted to volunteers.
Okay. Thank you. It's great inspiration. Don't know if Sonam or Marcos, you have ideas of using volunteers, or if this has happened locally. I know Tarayana works with the communities, or the communities are the ones who are doing the self-help work and get trained, and then also get professional skills for some of them that they can use as a income generating activity. If you have a last question for each other, please feel free to. Don't know if Sonam or Jose, you have.
I would just like to ask Marcos if he can give us any hints on how to deal with inflation. How can we do more with less? How can we sometimes create huge impact with low resources? I think that your project was an inspiration, so I would like to hear a bit more on that specific topic, if you could.
Thank you, Jose. Well, in Chile, there are foundations, organizations, NGOs that develop works that are similar to what you are doing in your countries. And to have a policy, a housing policy, as we have, the policy has to be part of the economic cycle of the country. The participation of the construction sector in the economy in our country is very high. They have an important share in our economy. And here we have the construction material industry, the construction companies, those that buy and sell the land, rural or urban. We have the workers, the technicians, and we all live on that. So both at a national level and at a local level, it's part of the economic cycle. The rural program has an advantage that we from the ministry also try to promote, and that is the development of the local economies. That is, we purchase the materials locally, we hire workers locally that are professionals, technicians that live in a community, so that the money that is assigned to a project stays in the community and moves the economy. Without that approach, it would be just a volunteering program. And this is what I wanted to share as a reflection. Even in the self-construction method, the workers are paid for doing that work. It's not volunteering. If the families are involved, the member of the family that participates in the construction is also paid for their work. So the economic scheme gives more sustainability. And I repeat, there are NGOs and foundations, both national and international, that work in the area. But I think it's important to find a way to have a policy. The rural areas are quite neglected in all the countries. We have made a huge effort. I don't know if this is helpful, but we use two indicators. One is the deficit, that is the statistics through the census and the national surveys to know how many people say they don't have a house. And the second indicator is the demand. That is those individuals that apply for or demand. Sometimes there are social movements also to demand housing, and that creates a pressure to have a policy. It's a combination between statistics and the direct pressure from those that require housing. With that, we know the universe and how much it can cost per year to do our work.
Reaching the end of this discussion, we started a couple of minutes late, so we'll just take the question from Carmen Oviedo from Fundasal in the chat. Maybe to you, Sonam, she asks how it is possible to mix the improvement of the housing with the improvement of livelihood in the programs that you develop. Is there any hint from your perspective and experience on improving also the livelihood for the families?
So as I mentioned, our development model, housing is just one part of our development model. Housing is also like the entry point for us to work in a community, a poverty-stricken community. So we do housing, and then the water, sanitation, toilet facilities. Then we focus on skills development. Most of these communities have a traditional skills, be it weaving or wood carving or anything to do with tradition. So we help them, we provide them more training, we help them diversify the product, and then we help them in market facilitation. So that enables them to earn an extra income and eventually improve their livelihood. So it's part of this holistic approach that we undertake. So housing is like one element of this holistic community development.